Painting done in watercolor ink looks so similar to watercolor painting that it can be hard to tell the difference, but don't be fooled by how similar they can look because they are completely different to actually use. Now we are going to find out difference between watercolors and watercolor ink. I am using Brustro artist watercolors for testing. I have started the first pair of swatches test about color lifting. You are seeing how easily the pigment lifts from the paper with a wet brush. The watercolor is far easier to lift, and if I had given it more time, the paper would have become very close to white. You are seeing that the watercolor ink is less permanent, but still it stains the paper more than the watercolor does. So be mindful of that. Watercolor ink are liquid colors used for writing, drawing, and painting. Unlike watercolor, in the sense that they are already diluted but similar in performance. A common problem with ink is that the edge of the pedal will dry quicker and darker than the middle, and any attempt to smooth it out can easily wind up lifting the water pigment in the middle. Be quick and careful when blending out an edge so that you do not end up making the dark streak at the pedal edge worse. The third swatch is about how two colors should layer with each other. In both swatches, I have started with blue, then layered green over the top, then added a little more blue to stop the green from overpowering it. The difference between these two mediums is that watercolor is particles of pigment suspended in water, and watercolor ink is more of a liquid stain. This means that the watercolor hue will mix more, while layered ink will make the new color more, with the light shining through the different layers. The fourth swatches is a quick out trying to darken and blend the colors while they are still wet. The watercolor was once again far easier to blend due to nature of the pigment. The shellac in the ink once again dried quickly at the edge in the drier place of the circle, and if I had gone back in to try and lift the dark edge, I would have only lifted the middle and ruined the dark portion of the circle. Final swatches are another color mixing. However, this time instead of layering green over a fully dry layer of blue, I am blending the colors when they are still wet. The watercolor ink blend turned out softer and more pleasant this time because this was not layering. The watercolor as usual was easy to blend. It is clear that the swatches is that watercolor inks are far more difficult than traditional watercolor for several reasons, but also it's clear to see that the ink have smooth texture with no granulation, and also the colors are super vibrant. So it is true that they are difficult, but this might be worth it to you depending on your taste in color and textures. We are going to paint a simple geometric form like a sphere. Get a deeper understanding of the difference between watercolors and watercolor ink. The watercolor sphere was made with a lot of wet and dry and wet on wet technique and making sure the paint become more concentrated with each layer. While working in watercolor sphere, it was easy to leave pigment with the paper towel to make the highlight brighter. I have made highlight lifting some color with the wet brush only. As with watercolor, you will start with the lightest shade in the painting because the ink is pretty much the darkest. You need to thin it in the water on your palette. To make the lightest shade, you will need to start with use an eyedropper or pipette to get the ink and the water into the well. Use very thin ink to make an even wash over the circle. Notice how the pigment spread it and create some beautiful visual when the ink is thin. When that layer is still as wet as possible, add another layer with a bit less water. Do not overwork any areas and have patience. I am doing wet on wet technique instead of using layering technique to avoid problem of the jagged edge. You have now seen watercolor and watercolor ink compared in a swatch test and a basic spear painting exercise. So let's paint something fun now. I am going to paint the same cloud painting twice using the same wet on wet technique but with the two different medium so that you can see the difference between the result. Cloud painted with watercolor have a lovely granulation effect with the Prussian blue and ultramarine in the sky, and the way that the Prussian blue, grey and black spread slightly in the wet on wet cloud area. These watercolor clouds are soft, gentle and natural. Watercolor ink sky is a lot more uniform and smooth and vibrant than the watercolor sky. The wet on wet technique for the cloud worked just as well here as it did with the watercolor, although I did use a slightly different color mixture. For cloud, I mixed the aquamarine, black and chocolate color. However, the way that my ink set was pigmented made the aquamarine, chocolate, and black mixture look warm grey color. The black ink color must have had a strong pigment. So, which is better, watercolor or watercolor ink? Certainly, watercolor is easier and more versatile. The color of the watercolor ink is lot more saturated and the washes are smoother. If you like that look, then it might be worth it to add watercolor ink to your art supply collection. For me, both are wonderful.